if I sit down and stand up and so forth. Okay.
No worries.
All right. Do we have handy the Boschkin or not yet?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
Because I deleted it yesterday.
If I do, I'll change around a little bit while you're working on that.
Okay.
I want to sort of lead in. Question?
I was just going to ask, with reference to the syllabus, are there specific readings you want us to compare for specific days of the week? Because they're separated out in the weeks right now.
Short answer is no. The short answer is scan over everything and then go back and look at the most important. But scan over, that is, they're consciously, that is, as you read, I'd say, rather than thinking just of the reading, I would say look at the propositions first.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to say, what am I reading and how do these things fit together? And it's all the more so today. And many of the readings, many of people, journalists, social scientists, tend to look for, in the 19th century, as I've said, simple and sovereign, one factor. Income explains this. Geography explains that. I mean, one thing is maybe all that they talk about, or competition from Darwin. What we do in this course is to say, all those things explain maybe 15%. So 85% is unexplained by these things that are simple and sovereign. Aha. So as we get into the 20th and especially the 21st century, life has gotten a lot more complicated. And therefore, we can't, if we try to have one factor or one theory, one sets of things, it's going to fall flat. I mean, even in the ideologically charged so-called Trump versus Harris, neither Trump nor Harris followed Democratic and Republican lines of the past. It wasn't the old left-right. We have the big, so one big label for that is issue specificity. That is, it's not as if there's one thing which is working, and this has been one of the biggest visible things for Americans is Trump. Trump, when he ran the first time as president, he was using then so-called Twitter, and he was putting out these little tweets. He didn't spend much money. He beat Hillary Clinton. She had much more money. She spent a ton of money. And Trump just, put out these little tweets, and the news, therefore, the journalists, the mass media picked up all of his little tweets, and each week, that was the news. He didn't advertise that at all. So that, but two, critical, he didn't fit into any of the categories of the past. Left, right, market. That is, if he should be on the right, just look a little bit internationally. If you look at the English, it's still a two-party system, basically, three maybe. But the conservatives versus labor. Prior to Margaret Thatcher, the conservatives were traditional, respect for the old elite, the gentry. Not aristocratic, but gentry, and the sense of maintaining propriety, respect, deference was critical. Margaret Thatcher came along, and she came from a slightly lower person, but she's very smart at Oxford, and she became market oriented. And so Milton Friedman was was her model. When he flew to England the first time, headlines in the tabloids, Milton, England hath no need of thee, parroting the old literary references. But and the smartest, I'd say smartest, most creative anthropologist in England at the time, who was working on not just studying one colonial village, but Levi Strauss, Clifford Geertz, and Margaret, Mary Douglas had all basically said, hey, realized, noticed, said this is the core of anthropology is dead. We can't do the way they did it, assuming that village is the world or it's unique and that the world is not there. Rather, these three said, you know, the world is interpenetrating even the little villages that used to be studied. And so Levi Strauss went to Brazil, into the jungles of Brazil. And he said, and he had been told, oh yes, there are many isolated villages, no contact with the world. So he went to the first, and they were watching, you know, they had radios or stuff like that. He said, let's try again. Same thing 3 times, and each time nobody was isolated at all. So he later put this book called Tristropique, Sad Tropics. The sad old tropics are part of this dirty old world, the big old world, global old world. But the point is, and then okay, so then one of the readings to make, so we're going to go back and forth between 2 or 3 things. We'll have some concrete examples like Margaret Thatcher, and I'm going to bring her. I'll bring a little bit more there. Then we have Thatcher, Trump. We have then countries. Then we have ideological labels, which say the party of the Conservative Party. Then we have the theories. Adam Smith versus Lenin, the big ideologies, then the theories. Then we have the later versions of the theories as those get qualified. So I'm going up and down to give you a couple of examples and to show where. So we want to. Our main topic is markets, but the main point that is new is the context defining. Not just defining the concept the concept of markets. Just to use examples you know of right here is Trump. Trump is saying, you know, Chinese are they cutting their prices? They're going to dump all this stuff in the West. We're not going to let them do that. We're going to put in taxes. Okay, that's a huge. That's the biggest thing that Adam Smith has said. Markets are great except for taxes. Okay, ever since that's gone up and down depending on the corn laws, etc. Many things that came in. Or steel. Should U.S. steel be sold to the Japanese? Biden has said no. Can't have a U.S. steel. This is the biggest steel production is right here in Hammond and Gary, Indiana, and Pittsburgh. Those 2 cities. And they're strong union cities, and Biden said very openly, our union people are key for us, and I'm not gonna let the Japanese take over our strong union industry. And he was out there protesting with so he with his protesting with the unions, is that the classic left or right, or where and why? You all should. That's an easy question, but just so you tell us all. Who can talk to us about that?
Do you mean Biden opposing the unions or Biden opposing the Japanese using?
Did Biden oppose the unions?
I might be misunderstanding the last sentence you said.
But Biden has said the Japanese may not buy U.S. steel. How does that relate to ideology and unions and theories?
I would think that is traditionally conservative in that it's supporting keeping U.S. U.S. production for U.S. interests locally.
Okay, good point. If his name were Trump, that would make sense. but his name was Biden. And what did he say, and to the press at least, why he did it? He didn't say that. He said
He
something
said it
else.
was to protect the union workers,
Yes.
which is more liberal.
Yes. So is that conservative?
Functionally, I think it's more, I think his intent is liberal, but I think
But liberal meaning left? That is, liberal has two meanings. Manchester level means market oriented.
not in terms of liberalism, but in terms of
left. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I would think that because it's, like his interest is to protect worker rights. And so even if, so I think that weighs more heavily on the impact than like the nationalism of keeping U.S. production in U.S.
Okay, I mean, these are all good points, but these are good to one or two times I may come in if it may like sound just a word, but the one word can have big ideological overtones. You said worker rights. What's the difference between worker rights and say unions?
I'm not quite sure.
Worker rights could be, I want to join a union or not, and have the right as an individual worker to choose whether or not to join a union. Whereas if it's a strong union workplace, and these are fought over bitterly, that if it's a strong union, that is, the individual worker cannot work for U.S. Steel or for some positions at the University of Chicago. These require you to follow the union regulations, whether or not you as a worker would like to, or that is, and those people, especially in those situations where unions are fighting and they're in the process of negotiating with Amazon right now, for instance, or others. The so-called strike break, if they go into a strike, the strike breakers could be individuals who say, I won't follow what the union is saying, which is strike for better wages. We'll work for lower wages because we need jobs for a month or two while the strike is on. So the strike breakers, you could say, are individual worker rights, are in conflict with the union. So the worker and union are, okay. So I think it's a simple basic point, but I'm just trying to talk to us about these because Margaret Thatcher came in, and I'm introducing both Margaret Thatcher and Mary Douglas simultaneously because Margaret Thatcher was smart when I went to Oxford, but Mary Douglas, who then seeing these things happening in England and happening with especially Margaret Thatcher as driver, Mary Douglas, came to the University of Chicago to study this economics department as an anthropologist. How does Milton Friedman, George Stigler, how do these people, can we close that a little bit so there's a little bit less strong wind coming through? Please? But that looks pretty, yeah, you're being very nice and precise. That's good. Mary Douglas, the anthropologist, was married to the director of programs. I think that was his title. It was director of programs, director of policy, something like that, for the Conservative Party. And he quit because he was so angry with Margaret Thatcher because he believed in gentleman propriety, deference to the Queen, to the King, to the institutions, to doing things properly and so forth. And Margaret Thatcher was, we want the lowest prices. We want competition better and more aggressive competition. And we're going to destroy some of those old families and old businesses. And a lot of that happened. So Margaret Thatcher then came to here, and then after that, she was appointed something or other professor at Northwestern, distinguished person. She was here for 5 years, and I met her a lot, as did Aaron Vildovsky, and they were simultaneously working on the transformation of ideology, and how these things fit together, and and the case I'm using, I'm making 2 or 3 things here, but one is the big one I'm making is the context of the market. That is, and this is going to go in each section of the course. We're always going to look not just at A leads to B, things like this. If we can just flash this for a second, if this is handy. Oh boy, that's pretty hard to see. Is there any way to make it darker?
Yeah, yeah. Let me just.
Or maybe turn out that light up there. I don't know if we can turn out the lights closer to there without. Just take a look for it, and then you maybe see how's it. No, maybe at this.
Let me check it.
No, at least I can't see that from. Maybe the first line of people. Okay, never mind. It's let me hold it up right here. This is simpler. But what I'm trying to say, and this is in the syllabus. I said, look at the syllabus. We're looking at boxes and arrows and what these things mean. That is, we're looking for the big simple points, and then and one big one is, and so with is where and how does the market work, and what transforms the workings of the market, and that's what's in this whole week, Monday and Wednesday both. So I'm not starting with the arrows and boxes. I'm starting with Margaret Thatcher as a key visible human being with her own passions, her own battles, and people. I mean, she created a huge ideological confrontation with, especially in England, led by the unions, and the cities of Birmingham, Manchester, but Birmingham was studied and we had, okay. The Birmingham Labor Party members were the dominant, the huge part of the city council, local city council. And they were so angry with Margaret Thatcher that they said, we're not gonna, I forgot what it was. That is, we're gonna drive the city into bankruptcy, and basically we'll vote to increase so much in taxes, not increase taxes. We're gonna spend on this, and we're not gonna raise any money. Therefore, we're gonna drive the city into bankruptcy. Therefore, we're gonna need to have the national government bail us out. And the National Labor Party said, no, that's stupid. You're going so far, you're just gonna give the Labor Party and the unions a bad name, and they kicked out voluntarily, that is the party and the Labor Party group and the union leaders themselves expelled from the Labor Party and the union that one city, even though they were city council members. They should be able to so in America maybe they could, you could have the New York fiscal crisis. They asked for money, and the same kind of thing was then happening. And this was then not just one case, these became global. These became the taxpayers' revolt. And so it was a battle between
I'm
cool?
so sorry. There's a meeting I totally forgot
Okay,
about
yep.
right about now. I'll be right back after this.
Okay, no problem. So these are good examples because they illustrate the normal left is the unions and the left party together. And so if some individual union goes so far, they can be in England, that is, they're strong enough that they could kick them out. But I mean, seeing these kinds of things happening, I worked with people, and we have continual meetings with a group of people working together called Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation. I covered briefly first session or so. And we try to figure out what's going on. So one time we had a meeting in one of these middle-sized towns with strong unions, and we had dinner. So I talked to a woman who was a city council member, and I said, how do you feel the pressure to follow a policy instead of just saying follow the Labor Party? I said, very specific. If I don't listen to each sentence of the party whip is the term, and I don't follow what the party whip says, I won't get what's the word here? The party won't put me forward as a candidate for the Labor Party. And so the party whip, my fear, that is my point of that quote, is the anecdote of the party whips. Each one word could lead you not to to lose your seat in the city council. Okay, so in these kinds of ideological sensitivities, I'm using not just to say it's right or wrong, but to show an example of how important these are in people's careers as city council members and more generally as policies. And then Margaret Thatcher, seeing these kinds of things going on, she then generally the party whips were fighting Margaret Thatcher. So she in turn had set up committees and tried to say, how can we make government work more efficiently and so forth. And they created, or they expanded, and they gave much more power and money to regional governments, or it may have been a metro area, or it may have been a county, or it may have been a little region or something like that. So in that sense, these they were called quangos. These became, and these were then often appointed by the national government, or done in a way that they were not controlled by the Labor Party. And so it was a shift away from of taking the money and the budget and the responsibilities away from the council members into these administrative units. Anybody know how this happened in Chicago that had a similar, or a different way of doing it, which could be not bigger but more local? Anybody know this? Everybody hear of a TIF? T-I-F? T-I-F-F? What's a TIF? Major finance issue in terms of markets and locals in control and ideology in Chicago, and not just Chicago. It happens all around the world. But in the case of Chicago, it's been very, very successful for economic development in conjunction with highly differentiated programs and policies that were changed that the mayor wanted to change. And the mayor had more responsibility officially, sometimes officially, sometimes unofficially, because of the party in the background and so forth. But the point is, the tax increment financing groups, and I sat on a couple of these committees. I was a member as Toni Preckwinkle. She's now president of the Cook County Board. She brought me on when she was alderman, and it was the north end of Hyde Park in Bronzeville, where I lived. And so there were a couple of TIFs there, and a new one was created. And I won't go into the legal details except to say that basically it's a different legal structure, and in Chicago they're generally quite small, much smaller than just one aldermanic ward, of which there are 50, so that may be 150, 200, 300 TIFs in Chicago. And these then could be generally, I shouldn't say generally in this case. I know enough about the specifics. We have both the mayor and the city council as a whole the individual city council member, and then the there were only a couple of aldermen who had, such as Tony Preckwinkle, had an advisory group of citizens and civic groups and so forth. So I was one of those citizens and civic groups who was actually recruited by Tony Preckwinkle. So these each have their own politics and their own political bases and their concerns. And so for instance, she was trying to reduce crime and improve the neighborhood friendliness of this whole area between Hyde Park and through the middle of Bronzeville down to the Loop. Okay, that was more than just her ward, but she was trying to reduce crime. And so one thing she had in mind was gangs and individuals, drunkards, homeless, bums, others were hanging out right in front of the liquor stores. So she wanted to close down the liquor stores, or at least not, or then to try to put on, tear them down, or say, mandate that we're going to put a new grocery store where everybody wants groceries. We don't want liquor stores with bums and crime. And so this happened multiple times, and this would then be discussed as ways of doing this with the owner of the liquor store was usually against it, and maybe some of the people who I won't try to get into detail the politics, but what I'm trying to stress is the context within which markets work. And it's usually a political, social, economic kind of series of things, which I'm illustrating with some powerful, globally important cases. Let me add one more thing, which is ironic too. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan worldwide, if you read the books by most social scientists and historians and journalists, was, where did the taxpayers' revolt emerge, and was it, and how was there this new right against the growth of government? Because basically there was a growth of government, more spending, more activities, the welfare state, from roughly World War II until this happened. And what was this? Many people will say it's Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. So we then started to look at this more closely, and we said, has anybody ever looked at, at this point, this was then, add in between, there was the New York City fiscal crisis. So New York basically declared, they didn't quite say bankruptcy, but the bank said, we're not going to loan you any short-term cash without a proper collateral, and just because we trust you, because we don't trust you anymore. You're just going, you're going over and over and over all your limits, and we're not going to loan you any money. And so they said, wow, all right, well, we can pay 2 weeks of salaries, and after 2 weeks, we're going to have to shut down the city. So they then said, oh, please, New York Times, this is a huge fiscal crisis. We need 2.4, didn't sound like so much now, but I think it was $2.4 billion in Washington. And the New York City controller and the mayor and the New York Times, many others would then say, please, we need, it's not very much money for the whole year. And it's not our responsibility. It's trying to maintain those things which, and so this was ironic, because I was also at that point consulting with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And the mayors would then have a meeting with other mayors preparing to take the case to the White House, to the U.S. Congress, and so forth. So I had all the mayors and their representatives, and I think it was the controller of New York said, what is likely? We've been supporting the Nutcracker Suite, so poor kids who couldn't afford to buy a ticket to the Nutcracker Suite at Christmas time, we give them tickets. And we're going to have to cut that out. And So one African-American mayor who said, you know, I'm from a town in Maryland, not all that small, not all that large, but we don't have a ballet, we don't have a Nutcracker suite, we don't have any item in our budget called funding of the Nutcracker suite. We're a poor city. Are you suggesting that we, as other mayors, should back this and that we're gonna take this to the US citizens and say this is important because New York City ought to be doing this? Okay, so among the mayors, you see this kind of debate was going on. And so the, how much explains the traditional left and right, and where, okay, so you can say, all right, so then, when we say how much explains, we need some numbers. We had to know, you know, how much is New York City spending on the Nutcracker suite, or bits of debt, or wages, or whatever else. And I was working with them, with the Conference of Mayors. I also spent a couple of summers with Brookings in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and so I knew the people who had these numbers and who were informing the policies on what to say. Do we have any, you know, how fiscally strained is New York compared to other U.S. cities? Nobody in the U.S. had any numbers. They didn't have a clue. So what you had was the mayor coming down, or the controller, because his official title is controller, he has a lot of money, so they didn't have any data. They had rhetoric. So it came back to Chicago, we worked with some research assistants, hard and fast, and the New York Times published our results, and we had New York City is hugely over the top, way out of line from the rest of other US cities, except it depends, because we had, I think, 20 or so indicators, and on some things New York could be higher and others could be lower than Detroit. So Detroit was higher on some, sorry, roughly the same on wages. Under Coleman Young as mayor, who had previously been a little bit like our current mayor in Chicago, a union person, who in his role as the union leader of the main industry for the United Auto Workers, UAW, paid more salary wages to his union members, and they were up there with New York. Okay, so my simple point is we then created some descriptive numbers, and then we did regressions to try to see, you know, what are the causes? So we got here these arrows, boxes and arrows, you know, what leads to what? What leads to the causes of these things? And that's what, we had some initial numbers, but we spent about 7 years. We got a lot of money because it was such a hot issue, and nobody had ever studied it before, including the banks and all those people. Say, oh, of course it's, you know, they didn't, you know, it was rhetoric. Okay, so basically since then, more people have tried to analyze these things as social science, but I tell you these stories because these are not things that were coming out of the sky, or that just everybody knows that. No, you gotta, if you have a Margaret Thatcher, you have an Abraham Beame, who was the mayor of New York at that time, then to try to see where and why are these policies being made, and how are these being defended? What were the actual arguments made? Ironically then, Reagan and Thatcher were given the credit or the blame for creating the taxpayers revolt. And we then, when for the first time we pulled some numbers together, what did we find? What year was Ronald Reagan elected? 1980. We started to look at when was local spending by cities across the US continue going up from 1945 roughly until when? Was it until Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980? No. The taxpayers revolt, if we measure local spending, not the omitting, we take out, that's the big trick, we took out the transfers from Washington, D.C. to cities, and what remains is local revenue, taxes, fees, charges, and so forth, put them all together. And then these were going up from 1945 until when? 1974. 6 years before Ronald Reagan was elected, local governments were decreasing across the entire United States. Which parties were in control of at least the majority of the seats in those city council members? Democrats. Democrats were cutting budgets? How can that be? Nobody, and New York Times said, you know, everybody knows Democrats don't cut budgets. Clark, you must be wrong, and so forth. So people threw eggs at me for 6 years. But then it was 78. 78 was 2 years before Ronald Reagan elected. California had something called Prop 13. Anybody know about that? Anybody from California, or know about that from your parents or grandparents or whatever?
I'm from California, but I don't remember what Prop 13 is.
Okay. Prop 13 was a referendum. California and Ohio are the two states with serious referenda that really bind legally the policies, or in other places, Illinois, we may do little questionnaires, but they're not real serious. They're serious in California. So they had a referendum, and Jarvis and Gann, it's called the Jarvis-Gann Initiative. We want to cut taxes, property taxes on homes and buildings by half the entire state, immediately. And so, and they got enough signatures, and the discussions were going on all across, campaigning back and forth. And finance directors, for example, in Oakland, would print up all kinds of little signs and put them up. This swimming pool will be closed if Prop 13 is passed. Don't vote for Prop 13. Vote against it, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened? What happened? 66% of the voters of California said, cut. And they did. So this was the taxpayers' revolt 2 years before the election of Ronald Reagan. Ah. So was it Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan? If we then trace it the other way and look at the budgets of the national governments in England and in the U.S., under Reagan and Thatcher, spending still kept going up, even though their ideology sounded as if they were really cutting everything, but in fact, not always. So different indicators will tell you a different story, and they all can be right in some sense. Okay. These are, I'm introducing more, quote, with stories, but let's look at a couple of propositions here, and then and then link this to the big readings. Well, the first big reading is, I'll go back and forth here, Adam Smith. What's the big point of Adam Smith? We only have a short little bit of reading from The Wealth of Nations, but it's the foundation of Chicago economics here, and not just at Chicago, but in many other places. Anybody have any observations? Is globalization that term used in Adam Smith? No. What did he say? Did he ignore globalization? He didn't have the word. Did he have anything else that could capture some of that?
When he focuses on the division of labor, causing more, or not causing, but corresponding to more specialized work that allows, like,
Once you,
communities to extend.
can we turn the camera on you for just a second? Yeah, good point. Maybe lower your mask a little.
Sure.
What's your name?
Bella.
Bella. Okay, thanks, Bella. Go ahead.
The specialization of of labor of the workforce allows for people to do more specific tasks and communities to extend the economics of the community to extend beyond just subsistence of that individual community and onto, I guess, people being able to like come to a marketplace and share the things that they're producing.
Okay, yes, I mean, you got lots of points, and yes, these are there, but how does this link with, and you were almost there, but how does that link with something as big as globalization, at least something moving in that direction, and just extending the words that you said?
Well, I think it connects to, it seems like the impetus of what will eventually turn into what Thomas Friedman wrote about, in the sense that like with the advent of the internet and other ways of like he says like flattening the world, different communities further and further apart are able to enter a marketplace together, whereas historically we're confined to your immediate vicinity in a very physical marketplace. And so in Adam Smith's time, they still have just physical marketplaces, but he's addressing sort of the start of communities being able to connect and use that. It's been a bit since I've read Adam Smith, but I've read him for previous classes, and that's great.
Okay, all good points, but he does have a specific concept and set of words for it. It's even in the syllabus.
Is it the division of labor piece?
No.
The invisible hand.
These are critical central concepts in Adam Smith, but they're not right targeted on on the distinctiveness that's linking to what, I mean, your answer of bringing in Friedman is very good, because that goes so far with the world is flat. If we take the title from Friedman, the world is flat, that shows in a sense it's obviously wrong empirically, but if we think of the theory of what's the ideal model, what is nice about the term is as in Smith, is it's not just a yes or a no, a black or a white, it's a variable. It's something which varies, which we can even measure locally or in different ways with different data sets. And anybody, have you glanced at the syllabus and have an answer yet?
Yeah, I mean, he's talking about like the size or the extent of the market and like how that pertains to more advanced divisions of labor. So
What's the first word?
extent.
Extent. Okay, that's the key word from Smith. It's fun. I mean, it's fun to use as a synonym of yours, but we've had it in quote because it's so important and to use his word. Extent of the market is his version of globalization. And so, your example is well put. People can take their produce, their corn, or this, and they can take it to the village and sell it there. But if it also is 25 villages where they may go to the next place, and so the prices tend to get more consistent, and they can raise prices a little more if they can go to the next town, then the extent of the market transforms the workings of the price and of the market dynamics. Okay. And I'm pointing to consciously as we proceed through the course, if we look where we can to go beyond dichotomies of black and white, it's either free market or socialism. What you have in China today is a complicated mixture. There are elements of markets, there's an element of state control, and what's happening with Trump. Trump says, We don't want the Chinese to stop the Panama Canal, you know. We want to, and so if we're not going to bomb them in the Panama, well, we'll use economic incentives. Okay, then it becomes a variable. How much of an incentive? How much can happen? How much? I mean, what can Trump do? Nobody knows at this point. But my point is, these are variables in that sense. And then, ideally, if it's we have data with its variation, we can then say how much difference does it make of A, B, C, and D, as I put on the board a week or so ago. Globalization and these other variables. That's what we're trying to do through the whole course. We're going to take a clear central major theme of this section. In this section, it's the market. The bigger the extent of the market, the more that the market dynamic should be working. I mean, that's the big idea in these propositions. But then we add a lot of subtlety. So where and why do we have things like taxes? Where and how we? So I've given you examples with selling out of U.S. Steel and of Margaret Thatcher and of ways that people, in fact, they're not only in Eastern Europe after the Berlin Wall went down. There were a lot of people who literally did read Adam Smith and Milton Friedman and so forth. And Margaret Thatcher would bring some of them in, etc. But mostly these were smaller, more personalistic, more context linked, but the consequences we can then analyze with data of the sort that I'm talking about, and they can ideally, and this is what we spent a year building this stuff up, building these propositions and codifying what's going on with globalization and how does it fit to local dynamics. Nobody done this before. So this syllabus, as I said, won a prize because we really, some of these are right, so it's not a question of right or wrong, but that is, these are clear, testable propositions. And we can look for data of different sorts to try to see how strong are these different patterns, and then see how and what it may shift other things. Okay. I'll just bring in one or two. Global market openness of the market can be driven by higher technology, more market access, and so, for instance, if a free worker could knock on the door and get the job, but it's prohibited by the union, that's less open. So the point is, it's not and I say less open because we can try to measure these with consistent kinds of indicators. So the proposition is, say, 1A, lower tariffs and government restrictions lead to larger markets. 1A. 1B, high technology for transportation and communication lead to larger markets and shared media access, such as potential globalization. And then number 2 is openness of the market, or linkages of the domestic economy with the global economy, generating international or global linkages, and so forth. And the extreme version is Thomas Friedman, and you know see this in the press regularly, that contracting out of all kinds of things is not just workers in America. If we contract out for interpreting an x-ray from a hospital, and you send it to Bangladesh and they send it back to you 45 minutes later, there's no foreign worker in the maybe, yeah, that's good. So I'm introducing the simple boxes and arrows. Yeah, you maybe block it with a door or something else like that if you can, please. how does any of this sound to you folks beyond my examples here? Let's explore a little bit, if you've looked at some of these, either these propositions or some of the readings, thinking about this in other courses. What are some of the other big I wouldn't say blockages, let's say variables that transform the workings of markets? How about one or two as we let's build on, say, the X-ray case. How does that fit with, say, with Trump, with what Trump is talking about? Or Biden? Not in the sense of being good or bad, not being, that is, and I'm asking because these are not simply normal, quote, pass left and right. These are illustrations of issue specificity and where and how their dynamics work. So if we take, what's the title? What's the title of the main book by Trump? Or the key word in the title that he's focused on. The contract. I think it's the art of the contract, something like that. The art of the deal. Okay, so he said, for instance, Iran, Obama got a bad deal. You know, we're not going to respect it anymore. And he did. And so we've got Iran, all kinds of complications right now in the Middle East with Iran, if you will. But the point is, it's not just Trump. This is another way of making decisions, which is making deals or making contracts, and there are different labels which have they're in different legal systems and so forth. But the point is, and I'll introduce two. One is the English tradition from Hobbes and Locke and others, which was, how do we build a strong government or a proper government or an efficient government or one which is democratic, and where and how do these things fit together? So we had Hobbes's statement was the Leviathan. You need to have a strong leader in order to keep crime down, or people otherwise will have the state, Chicago. Trump's image of Chicago, the bad image of everyone. Okay, so the Locke's answer countered with what? You all should know about this as part of your general education at the University of Chicago and wherever. Smart people that you are, you ought to be able to know just when you see this. Hobbes is one. Contract theory leading up to Donald Trump. What's an alternative to? So Trump could say, of course, you need to have a strong leader in order to keep order in the streets. Everybody knows that since time. Okay, is there any answer to the founding fathers in the U.S., the Constitution? What's the theorist who really influenced them and a lot of other Americans today? Locke. John Locke. Okay. Locke's theory was, we'll use contracts, but we're not going to just impose it from above. The legitimacy of democracy comes from below. It's citizens both from below, and they have leaders who are the city council or the national government representatives, and they make a compact or contract with the leadership, and they make laws and try to change them and so forth. But basically, the relationship between the driver is the voter, the citizen, and that means through the mechanism of the contract of individual laws, we use indeed deals, that rather than having the Roman tradition, the Roman law, it's all written down. So in France or in Italy, they have 1,223 laws that are all written out in the Roman law, codified. The American tradition comes from the English. The English is called common law, and the precedents set by examples bubbling up are what the law consists of. It's not in a constitution in a way that is all laid out in advance. Okay, so in that sense, is there a thoughtfully reasoned logic of where and why A leads to B leads to C through markets and so forth? That put differently, how big is the market? What and how pure is the market in terms of efficiency, meeting, quote, the assumptions of normal Smithian kinds of dynamics? Openness to access, freedom of entry, information, ideally full information. Okay, information has been played up much more in the late 20th centuries. We've got an explosion of everybody having their own iPhone, and they can look stuff up like that. That wasn't true, in 1980, 1970. There was a whole lot less information about what the price might be, or what who has what kinds of guns and tanks and so forth. The additional label, which we'll elaborate in another week or two, is the moral covenant. It gives a moralistic flavor with a different word, but it's a covenant. And why does it have a moralistic meaning? This is theorized best by Daniel Elazar, but drawing on many others. And the biblical source is Moses leading the Jews, leading as slaves. The Jews left Egypt. The waters opened. The Jews crossed. Moses went to the mount and spoke to God, and God gave the message. And the message was to follow a moralistic covenant. And that in turn led to things later on, like things like the Ten Commandments. So the point is, this wasn't a legal, that is, and so Elazar then build this up in much more detail. We'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. But my point is, these are all variations of the foundational piece, which is the covenant or the contract, in contrast to the quantity, the supply, or that is, it's those things which feed into and transform the workings of markets. And it's being featured right now. Trump doing this and that in turn is leading others to do this more. The Europeans are changing prices for Russian oil and so forth, and cutting off the oil going to Europe, Western Europe, and these in turn are leading to the Chinese thinking about, and at least rhetorically presenting some of their policies as counters or responses to what, I mean, if Trump is going to, charge 25% or something or other on cars produced in China, what will we do in China in turn? So that kind of covenant or deals, it is not a covenant. It doesn't come from God. These are, and so we have, so symbols of power, toughness, other kinds of things, nationalism, and so forth. So these will feed into the sections which we have on political culture, on democracy, other kinds of variables. I'm just mentioning to say that these are not just random terms, that these will be other sections of the course, and these are competing dynamics in our own lives, in the choice of labels, in the choice of one word, in the choice of symbols. So let's do we have easily handy, the Boschkin list again?
Okay.
We're gonna talk about this one with Sasa, maybe somehow if we could get, we need to get something that we can make it sharper. This is great, I mean, but we went over this before. Let me add, I'll just go right to one bottom line as I went to this, with everyone here today, looking at the newspaper last 5 years, looking at the stock market in the last 2 years or this year. What's the biggest company and the hugest big increase in the whole driving the stock market? And the market of prices with especially capital and new commitments of resources, names of new companies that are taking off, people who are being hired and who are getting new training. At the University of Chicago has created a new center. It was a master's program, it's now becoming a new center for computational social science. And what is its main theme from the courses? And I'm trying to learn more myself, and so I'm adding my question.
According to Professor Jim Savins, the goal of this program is to revolutionize the research method of social science by applying artificial intelligence, big data, extra to this realm. AI, and the associated huge amounts of data, which has the potential for extending these views of markets, not just these kinds of things, mass transit, railroads. What is the potential of AI and why? And this is on the newspaper today. The Chinese have estimated that they will have, I think, well, or it was maybe a couple of months ago, Microsoft bought, I think, a nuclear reactor to have more energy that Microsoft could access. What's the Chinese answer? They have something like 220 new energy centers for data to support the data building for AI. Massive numbers. Some of these are what's in your cell phones. It gets logged, it's stored. People then can say, you bought shoes that are red shoes. You're a red shoe person. Let's send you more stuff. Red shoes, okay. And they just get, so it comes initially from the narrow selling of stuff like that. But AI is now everything that you may write or have written. We don't know if everything is disclosed, maybe not everything that you have written, but let's say the books, the journals, the newspapers. And then we have the potential for searching all of these things and putting them together and where and how they get used and adapted. This takes all this stuff much, much further in terms of information. One more, what's the big, another, in terms of AI, 20, 30 years ago, or say, after World War II, how did the stock market work? Typically, if your grandparents or whatever, when they had an extra $1,000, or if they were a union member and their union has put in $1,000 for you, and they're going to somehow invest that, how would they choose that, where to invest those $1,000, say in the 1940s? They'd go to a Merrill Lynch broker, a personal relation. You as a citizen or you as a union advisor, say, you're in Merrill Lynch, you're the big company, you've got more brokers across the whole US, you've got them everywhere. How should we invest this? Oh, this is what you should buy. You should buy General Motors stock. So you get told by the broker to buy one stock or 10 stocks. Does this happen today? No. Those brokers are largely wiped out. someone who I know personally, she got a PhD here at the university. She almost got a PhD. She was teaching here in Chicago, and Gary Becker said she really ought to do this more conscientiously. Ought to do this, and so she said, no, I'm not going to do that. So she never got a PhD, economics, and she didn't want to. She said, quote, she didn't want to be an okay teacher of economics. I want to do something more interesting. So she and her husband got some loans. And they bought the San Francisco Stock Exchange. And her husband and others, they knew how to replace the brokers and the traders who were buying and selling them on the floor with computers. And it worked so well for about a year that they told us about other banks and others, and they gave them a couple of many millions of dollars, and they bought the New York Stock Exchange. And they replaced most of the traders with computers. And then the same things happened in several European, and they worked with some of those, and then I think they retired at age 48 or something like that. So they live here in Chicago, in the South Side, the South Shore, and they're neighbors of Jesse Jackson. And I go to a 4th of July party and talk to them. And so anyway, so my point is, markets then drastically be changed, and one of the critical things is information. As we get more access to fast information, and the issue was split-second information is critical for a market like this. And as this became possible, more and more technologically advanced, markets would go further. So what was the theory of how business in U.S. business schools taught about how markets worked in the 40s and 50s? Personal relations, brokers, so forth. What happened by the later in the 20th century? Ever hear terms like the random walk or the efficient market hypothesis? Ever heard of these things? Okay, these are the core of financial theories today in the world. Where in China, Hong Kong, they still have markets. They're big stuff in China as well. And an efficient market is one which ideally has complete information. Everybody has the same information. But what the people who are then working on this are saying, we know that not everybody has the same information, so therefore the random walk theory is that if everyone does have the same information, or not, they might be able, you might be able to get it, but you don't have big computers and lots of data and so forth, and therefore the people who really are doing this well have got, like the woman and her husband who bought the New York Stock Exchange. They figured out where to get this to make it more efficient. As you have things get more efficient and more information with the AI kinds of databases that we're getting here, these are expanding the information revolution and making market the market. Can you, if someone says, I've got a deal for you, I've got the rights, I've got a new stock, buy this stock with your $1,000 and you can really make a lot of money. Okay, that's a possible deal, and it's and the people who are saying at the University of Chicago developing this new approach are saying, can you do that reasonably? The answer was no, because there's so many people who know about the deal, whether it's the Wall Street Journal of that day or of something else, which is spread from the people who are researchers and who then put this out along as well. degree of information and the quantity and the degree to which the information is shared is a key measure of the extent of the market, and the openness and the price and the speed with which it is in fact an efficient market. And instead, if you try to make money when a market is efficient, instead the price, there will be a random walk. If it's an efficient market, you can't make any money by buying one stock and trying to think that you'll be able to outsmart the rest of the people who are doing this all the time. Okay, so we'll continue on Wednesday, but as you see, we're trying to join the readings with some real life examples that are true, very important, big, historically significant actors like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and then the literature which is wrong about some of this, and right by different people at the University of Chicago. Okay, we'll continue on Wednesday and look forward to more. We could have office hours if anybody, Mondays after class if you want to chat. Stay around.